All right, so let's jump into it before we bring two great guests I have coming your way here on this episode of the show. Really excited for you to hear those conversations and see those conversations. The college football playoff rankings are out, the third installment of these rankings. So we're going to look at it and see where everybody is at on there. So at number one, and the top five stay the same as last week. You got Oregon at number one, still undefeated. You got Ohio State, Texas, and Penn State sitting there one loss. Indiana is undefeated. Then you have where the changes have come. Notre Dame goes up 2 spots to 6. Alabama goes up 3 spots to 7. Miami goes up 1 to 8. Ole Miss is at 9, jumping up 2 spots. They were at 11. Georgia goes up to 10. Tennessee goes down to 11 after losing to Georgia. They were at 7. Boise State goes up 1 at 12. Then 13 is SMU. Then at 14, you have BYU, who lost against Kansas. You have Texas A&M sitting there at 15, and Colorado sitting there at number 16. So now let's go back to just how the top 12 look. It is all very confusing, and that's what I'll break it down to you. So these are what their teams are ranked, but this is not how they would be seated. And I think that is one of the confusing things for somebody that maybe just be a casual fan looking at this thing with the rankings, how teams are going. So your top 4 seeds right now would be Oregon number 1, Texas would be 2, Miami would be 3, and then Boise State would be 4. Your 4 highest ranked conference champions would be 4. So now you look at the top 12, and if you're watching on YouTube or anywhere else where we got the show as a video, you're seeing the rankings on the screen right now. So when we move over to the next 4, as I just said, SMU at 13, BYU at 14, Texas A&M at 15, Colorado at 16. So then that would put BYU into the playoffs. So the rest of the seeding goes like this. Ohio State would be 5. Penn State would be the 6th seed. Indiana would be the 7. Notre Dame is the 8. Alabama is the 9. Ole Miss is the 10. Georgia is at 11. And 12 is BYU, Big 12, highest ranked team. So you would have some kind of interesting matchup. Ohio State, BYU, 5-12. No issue with that being a 5-12. Notre Dame, Alabama. Okay. I'm going to start nitpicking here a little bit. And look, we all want this thing to look a certain way, fairness, blah, blah, blah. And here's my thought. And as we've gone on these weeks with these rankings and the conversations and everything else going on with this, I want the 12 best teams. I don't care about conferences anymore with this. I mean, and I know, and everybody's going to say, well, the NFL model and division champs, blah, 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 blah. Look, let's get the best 12. Let's rank them 1 through 12. We'll see these teams 1 through 12. If you think Ohio State's the second best team in the country, they should be the number 2 seed in this thing. Then it should be Texas. Then it should be Penn State. I still think Indiana should be ranked higher than Penn State because what has Penn State done this year? Okay, they beat USC. USC is not good. And on paper or by the score, it was a close game against Ohio State. But Ohio State was never in doubt or in having to have fear of losing to Penn State. Yes, they went down 10-0. Penn State come down the field, got a field goal, did a pick 6 by Will Howard, and they're up 10-0. But Ohio State dominated the game after that point. That game was not as close as the scoreboard indicated. And now we look at Notre Dame at 6. And the thing with Notre Dame that gets me here with them, should they be number 6? No, they shouldn't. They lost to Northern Illinois. Come on. They have the worst loss out of any of these 12 teams in the playoff. I mean, hey, Boise may have one of the best losses. They only lost by 3 against Oregon. I mean, and you look at Alabama. They lost to a solid, decent Vanderbilt team on the road, and they lost to a good Tennessee team. Miami, look, they lost to Georgia Tech. It is what it is. Miami was playing with fire up until that point. So they were eventually going to, get it there. Ole Miss, they beat Georgia. You got 9. And you look at Georgia. Their 2 biggest wins, Tennessee and Texas. The number 3 team in the country now, they flat out dominated. And then they did the same against Tennessee. Tennessee jumps up 10-0, and then Georgia pretty much controls the game. And you look at Tennessee wins over Alabama, and then Boise sits there 12. I am sorry. And look, I know if you're listening to this and you are not an SEC fan, you're going to listen to what I am saying and you're going to say, well, this guy's SEC bias. But you know what? If you're watching on YouTube, look at the screen. What is my Twitter handle? It is P Jordan SEC. I do not hide from the fact that I think this is the best conference in college football. When I used to do my old radio show, the Sideline Review, I always had the tagline. It was a joke in some ways, but in other parts, I was serious. There's only three conferences that matter: the AFC, the NFC, and the SEC. Now, when I say that, that's a little bit jest. The Big Ten's got some good teams. Oregon's good. Ohio State's good. I think Penn State's overrated, and we're going to find out how good Indiana is this Saturday when they play Ohio State. And I'll give you my pick on that later on. But we look at the ACC. We look at the Big 12. There is no reason why any of these SEC teams should be ranked behind a Big 12 or an ACC school. Tennessee, Ole Miss, Georgia should all be ranked ahead of Miami. They would all beat Miami. Alabama would beat Miami. There's team Texas A&M would beat Miami, and that's just the honest truth here. And I'm glad BYU's kind of down, went down. So now we look at them, but they're not even the top 12. Honestly, I think Colorado's going to be the Big 12 champion. At least, they do have the talented quarterback, Travis Hunter, and all that stuff. But come on, let's look at this how it is. And when I look at Oregon, Ohio State, Texas, I have no problem with those three as your top three. But it's still flawed because we don't know. Do we really know how good Texas is? And I feel like I'm just slamming all these teams because all these teams have warts. They all have flaws. And there's not a team here you can say with a shadow of a doubt that you can say they are going to win a national championship because they all have flaws. They all have issues. Oregon, look, I'm not too sure how great they are in the trenches, especially on the offensive line. Ohio State, is Will Howard the guy that can lead you to a championship? I don't know. Texas, I just went back to it. How good are Texas? Early in the year when they beat Michigan, we thought it was a really good win. But now when you look at what they've done, the only good team they played, Georgia, beat them. And they beat them soundly in their place. Penn State, they have beaten no one. Indiana, let's face it, hey, 10-0. I'm happy for you. It's been a great year. But who have you beaten? Notre Dame, same thing. Who have you beaten? But when we look at an Alabama team, we know who they've beaten. They've beaten Georgia. When we look at Miami, who have you beaten? Nobody any good. Number 9, Ole Miss, who have you beaten? You beat Georgia, and you beat them soundly. Then we go to Georgia. Who have you beaten? They beat Texas, and they beat Tennessee. And we look at Tennessee. Who have they beat? They've beaten Alabama. Now, they lost to Arkansas. Now, that is one I will say they need to be knocked on. So we just look at these things. And look, I know with Ole Miss, look, they lost to Kentucky. I get that. And they lost to LSU. Now LSU's a 4-loss team. But you can't tell me, if we just rank these teams 1 through 12, that you could put some of these teams ahead of these SEC teams and these Big Ten teams too. As well, I'm going to give these teams credit. The best teams are in those two conferences because I just don't see BYU, Colorado going far, and I just don't see the ACC champion going far, whether it be Miami, SMU, or if Clemson can somehow get in the conversation with that. So it's flawed still, the system we have and the way these rankings are going. We just have to look at these things differently than we did before. We're looking at the number on the right side, the 0. If you're undefeated, you're going to be ranked high. And yes, Indiana's undefeated at 5, and they have 3 one-loss teams ahead of them. But Notre Dame should not be ranked as high as they are. They're not getting punished for the Northern Illinois loss, and I think they should. I'm not saying they shouldn't be a playoff team. I'm not saying that. But they shouldn't be ranked number 6. And then when you look at that, that means Notre Dame's going to get a home game in the first round of the playoff. But we'll see how this thing's going to shake out. Oregon, Ohio State, we know they're going to meet up again in the Big Ten championship game. Penn State, look, they may end up 11-1. Indiana, we're going to find out how good you are this week when you play Ohio State. Notre Dame, they've got their big matchup coming up this weekend. You've got Alabama. Look, they've got Oklahoma on the road, and they play Auburn. They should win their game. Miami should make it to the ACC championship game. Ole Miss, They should finish 10-2. Georgia should too as well with UMass and Georgia Tech still on the schedule. And then you got Tennessee. They're going to have a tough one with Vanderbilt to close things out. And then we'll see what happens with boys. And let's not forget about Tulane and Army and all that stuff. Army's undefeated right now. And just kind of looking at the rest of the rankings that went behind, I just gave you on the screen the top 16. Clemson is 17. South Carolina is 18. That's another thing with South Carolina. I think South Carolina would beat Miami. I think they beat Boise State. I mean, Indiana, they would, and Penn State. I'm not going to necessarily say without a shout out, and Notre Dame as well, that South Carolina beats those teams, but it would be a game. I mean, South Carolina is just a few plays away, a handful of plays, maybe less than that, being a one-loss team. And we're talking about them in this top 12 being in the bracket. When you move out, like I said, Miami is undefeated at 19. They will play Notre Dame this week. Tulane, 9-2. They've moved up 5 spots. They weren't even ranked last week. Missouri is somehow still in this thing at 7-3. But so it's just, I don't know. I guess I was in a ranting mood on these playoff rankings today. But that's just how I'm seeing it. It's some things need to be arranged. I would just like there to be the best 12 teams seeded. No conference tie-ins, no automatic qualifiers, just 1 through 12. The best 12 teams are ranked, they're seeded, and we have it like that. But we'll see. We'll see how this shakes out. I am looking forward to it when we get the bracket, when the tournament starts with these 12 teams. I think it's a lot of fun. It's probably going to be unpredictable because we just don't know who's going to be the best team, who's going to win this thing. But where we go from these next 3 weeks, we got 2 weeks of the regular season, then we got championship Saturday. These next 3 Saturdays are going to be very, very, very interesting in college football.